Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for attending this session on academic integrity in the age of artificial intelligence. So this is just our session contents. We're just going to go briefly through a few slides, but most of it is going to be a panel discussion today where you please feel free to bring your questions about both academic integrity and using AI. I want to get you into the frame of mind of thinking about academic misconduct. So if you can talk to someone near you, or if you're online, talk to yourself. Just think about the kinds of academic misconduct that you have encountered. And if you have been in the profession for a while, think about how that might have changed, what it used to look like versus what it did. And I'll just give you a couple of minutes to really go into Zen mode of thinking of all that cheating that's happened in the past. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you're just coming in now, we're talking to each other about some examples of academic integrity that we've seen. I was going to, I've seen a lot of academic misconduct come across my desk because I oversee the process and log all of the academic misconduct for academic affairs. So over my career, I've seen the trends of what gets turned in, and I'm sure that that's on the low end because I'm sure not everything gets turned in. But instead of telling you about what I've seen most recently, I'm going to tell you about the time that I cheated. No. So yeah, in 10th grade English, I loved English as my favorite subject because it was like having a book club where people showed up and had maybe read the book. But our teacher was really keen on getting people to make sure that they'd really read it and weren't just reading the cliff notes, because that was AI of 1990s. And so she would put these pop quizzes together and ask us really obscure things. And I remember it was All Quiet on the Western Front. And she asked us what color the boots were that he was wearing at the end of a certain chapter. And she left the room. And so it was 9 of us in the room. And we all looked at each other and we're like, does anyone know? And the problem was that we couldn't all put the same thing and it'd be wrong. So it was a failed attempt at cheating. But nonetheless, because she had made this very high bar of like, we had to know these very specific details that Cliff Notes wouldn't tell you, it kind of encouraged us to want to talk to each other about how ridiculous that particular set of quizzes was. I did actually just love that class and read a lot of good books, but that's one of the times that I cheated because it felt like a good time to do it. So I'm sure you've encountered some kinds of cheating in yeah.
What color were the boots?
I believe they were brown, but we couldn't really decide on the end. And it turns out that was very symbolic of something I don't remember. So in terms of cheating at NDSU, I log all of the allegations of misconduct. And again, these are allegations. They haven't been necessarily proven, and the student hasn't gotten to say anything back about it, although there probably should have been a conversation about that cheating that happened before they turned it in. There's nothing written from the student. So it goes into our office instead of into their student record so that it won't be held against them if it was indeed not actually misconduct. And you can see, I just wanted to show you, like, we had a huge spike in people turning in academic misconduct during the pandemic. I don't think that's a surprise. I think that's when Chegg especially became very financially lucrative. But since then, it has gone back to a more, what I would consider, normal number of about 40 or so instances a year. And we have had only, in the time that I've been logging this, I think this goes back until 2010 or so, 18 instances of students with multiple allegations. And that's what we're tracking it for. So we're not really tracking it to see so much what's happening in each class in each instance, but when there's multiple, then we do investigate. And the dean usually has to get involved and make decisions about the student's progress and have some longer conversations. The types of misconduct that get turned in are largely collaborating against the instructor's rules and your very classic cheating off another student, using technology they weren't supposed to, and now much more often Chegg and using ChatGPT when you weren't allowed to use it. And the penalties instructors impose, because as the instructor, you can impose pretty much any penalty that you want as the authority over your class. So Some instructors just give a warning and say, do the assignment again. And other instructors say, you failed the class and you may not withdraw. So there's a wide range depending on how serious the instructor thinks that cheating was and how much they want to give students a second chance at the assignment. Does anyone have any questions about what we're doing for academic misconduct? We do have a form. Of course, we have a form. There's always a form. And this form is in Campus Connection, but we have a link from the actual policy so that if you do need to turn in academic misconduct, it goes straight from the instructor to the provost's office, me, and I simply notify the people per policy that need to be notified, and it just lives in this database. If there's another attempt at academic dishonesty, we take further steps. But other than that, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't hurt the student outside of that particular class penalty. So now we're going to turn it over to the panel. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Question. I think that the policy has changed over my time at NDSU. Can you just comment a little bit on sort of what the expectations are for reporting academic misconduct? Because I mean, those numbers are not representative, right? That's just like the number of cases that are reported. And that's going to be very much dependent on.
So what you're saying is that the numbers are probably low because not everyone turns in every instance of academic misconduct. I would guess that to be true. I don't know if the policy changes that I remember us making in recent years were more about making it clearer how the student can appeal the misconduct and also just changing. It used to be housed in registration and records. It's possible that we're going to be looking at that policy in the future because of artificial intelligence, but right now I don't think there's a faculty group looking at it, but the AI certainly, there's action teams or whatever they call those groups now on campus who are going to get started looking into AI.
Ask a quick follow-up then. So this is more of a point of clarification than I sense when I first arrived here was that those guidelines for reporting were advisory, but my last look at the policy seemed read like if you impose a policy, you ought to submit an academic misconduct report.
The reason we ask that you submit, if you have imposed a penalty, that you submit it through the form is one, so that we have that data, but also because there are certain consequences that a faculty member may choose to impose that registration and records needs to know about. So that like, if you say you're getting an F and you cannot withdraw from the class, we make sure that that happens on the back end, because that would be the first thing that a student might try to do is just drop the class. So that's the reason. I think it's also helpful to have the data of what's happening in the classes, but there's no way that we can mandate that. So it's just, please turn it in if you can so that we know what's going on in our classes and what types of cheating is happening. But, maybe the number is still pretty low, even of the turned in. So that's the good news. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves and just tell us what you do here on campus. And if you have anything fun you want to say about cheating that's occurred in your classroom, please go ahead. We'll start with Eric. Identify yourself by your real name, please.
I was asked to wear the Eric shirt today. And so I'm Dennis Cooley. I'm the chair and professor of, I don't know, I have to actually read off my thing here at the School of Humanities. And I teach ethics. So some of you know, I do business ethics, I do ethics and engineering and so on. So my rule is you cheat in my class, you fail for the semester, and that's all there is to it. And you get the report in because the report is important. Why? Because if we're getting multiple instances of this, at one time, the provost would consider whether or not to expel the person, which I think is essential to keeping a very high standard, especially since all these other students are working their tail off and there might be getting a C when somebody else is doing A. I actually think cheating's much higher than that, but there are a lot of faculty who don't want to bother with it. The chat GPT thing is going to be a big problem. It already has turned out to be a big problem for us. So I'll talk about that later. I think the funniest one I ever had was I had a person from another department come to me to ask what to do about cheating she had caught in her class. She said they cheated. They had basically stolen from a particular article that had been published. I said, how do you know that? She said, I wrote it. And she'd gotten married, so they weren't smart enough to realize her last name had changed. And so, by the way, she failed 23 students out of 25.
That makes me really sad. I'm Sarah Crary. I'm in the Office of Teaching and Learning, and I work a lot with the online programs. I'm trying to think. And I come from being in K-12 for a lot of years too. I never had a ton of cheating. And I know this because I would mix up how I would do tests, mix up the order of them, mix up the multiple, just maybe how the answers were, the numbers. And the one time I gave them to them, I'd say, okay, number 1 on this, number 10 on this. Then I do the next one. I'm like, all right, number 1. Like, well, what about mine? Yeah, it's the same test. Really? They had no clue. So I just really didn't. I have my theories and beliefs as to why, but I don't have any great story. If they cheated, they were just super lazy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Braaten, Chair of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And I'd say I saw a story that came to mind. Some of you, I don't know if you're familiar with, some of you might be familiar with Chegg or not. In engineering, we see it. It's a service that students can subscribe to, and they can submit their homework problems, and a person can solve their homework and send it back to them, and they could submit it or use it for studying. And now there's some AI-based tools integrated into this platform. But we're struggling with what to do. I think we've come to where we won't fight it. We'll try to figure out how to teach alongside it. But it's funny. It's interesting. We see it. Students will sit in the hallways and use Chegg in our building, and they'll submit homework. We've gone on and found our own homework. There's an honor guard system that we can submit our homework early, and they'll screen against that. When a student walked in, this was a few semesters ago, and it was working on one of my homework problems. And he brought his laptop in and put it on my desk, and he said, Chegg's answer was different than your answer. Step back. This is a learning opportunity in a couple of fronts. We had a conversation about the homework, and we had a conversation about Chegg. My policy is I have a little different take on if a student's cheating in class. In my mind, the university is about development of a person, a young learner. And if they fall down a few times, I think in my mind, I'm here to help them learn from these things. If it continues to progress, then we take it further. So I found there's opportunities to teach students outside of the classroom on other aspects of learning. So that's my story.
You got to finish that one. Who was right? You.
Oh,
Chegg.
I don't remember. I think remember. It might not have been a complete problem. I think there was some fault in the home.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember. I remember the conversation. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric.
Hello, my name's Brent Hill. I'm a professor in the School of Education, and I teach mostly the quantitative methods, psychometrics, and survey research methods. So I'm more of a quantitative person. Mostly I've been working with graduate students. Recently, I've been allowed to teach undergraduates in educational psych, which is kind of one of those things I'd like to teach on the side, which is kind of my content area, even though I consider myself a methodologist. So as far as, I don't really have any good cheating stories for my students because, well, that'll become apparent with some of my points that I want to make. Working with doc students, the motivation to cheat there is different, and I think in most cases minimized. It has happened a couple times, but it's been very rare, and it's usually been and for us, when it happens, it's so blatantly obvious because we're all familiar with the literature and the people that have been, doing the most recent writing, historical writing. The issue that we've come across is we encourage collaboration, and there's a gray area. It's one of those things where when it's cheating and when it's not. And sometimes when students in some of my courses where they share answers, they should be just talking about it. Sometimes they'll share an answer and they will make the same grammatical mistakes and the same typographical mistakes. And the one most blatant one was where they came up with the same variable names, abbreviations. They used underscores in the same place. They even had a space, comma, space orientation instead of, it was a good lesson for probability. It's like, you're right, there is a chance that you both did this at the same time and came up with this exact same string of characters, but the chances of that is, essentially 1 in 2 billion.
Probably zero. Yeah.
Yes, effectively zero. So, and if you wanted a quick story about cheating, not that I've experienced one, but I'll always take any opportunity to embarrass my older brother, who's not here. He is currently an attorney and works in ethics. Anyway, I promised diagrams. So where's the camera? It's maybe hard to see. I drew this real quick. He went to a larger university. I won't name the name, University of Oklahoma. He went in the 80s. And that was back in a time when the pedagogy was different, larger sections of the classes, and they didn't really keep track of anything. He was a chemistry major, and in his fraternity, anytime that there was an exam in the chemistry class, he would just go in and sit in that
Position where there's a star.
because it was a stadium seating. And he would sit there, and then other guys that were in that class from his fraternity would sit on his wings, and then they would basically pass the answers back in that pattern. So I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but essentially it's just they call it the flying V, which was also, yeah, it was concerning that they actually had a clever name for it, but. Anyway.
So if at any time anyone has any questions or follow-up to anything that's been said, please feel free to jump in. I'm just going to start with some prompts that we came up with to sort of highlight the things that are coming up in the world of both academic integrity and artificial intelligence, as well as what's happening here at NDSU. So my first question is for Dr. Braaten. What types of academic misconduct are you seeing in engineering? You talked about CHEG. So maybe since you mentioned that, what are instructors in your area doing to test learning outcomes in spite of services like CHEG, which CHEG is a subscription that students pay for. And I think sometimes you can get a deal where it also comes with some Uber Eats. It's like very enticing to students. And once you put your information in there, it belongs to CHEG, which you mentioned that you're sending them your tests ahead of time. So
Thank you. Uber Eats, huh? So we've put some thought to this question. Thank you. I would say, and I'll speak in electrical and computer engineering. I've heard some comments about this in other departments. Not every example I've heard elsewhere, but we teach early. We teach some applied mathematics that goes into electrical and computer engineering, in particular courses like circuit analysis and some early digital circuits. We also teach topics around programming, early programming in different languages to our first and second year students. And the tools that we're seeing, I would say in the last 2 or 3 semesters, are doing better at solving these problems, these homework problems that we're giving out, particularly in the coding side. We talked about CHEG. Conmigo came on the radar about a year ago as a beta, as a prototype, and it's being rolled out, and that's a subscription process. Wolfram Pro is another one where you can put in some vector calculus problems, and it'll kick out solutions there for fields problems. For sure, down below when you get into circuits problems and digital problems, there's several new tools that we've seen in the last 6 months even that have come out that work more in a tutor AI interaction for some of the earlier foundational mathematics that we need for our early classes. And especially on the coding side, it's been a discussion we've been having recently in the department on how do we start to change our classes so we can assess against our course objectives that are approaches other than homework. And homework is still there. In some early classes, the mindset has moved towards it's more of an exercise. If you want to become familiar with the projects or the topics, it's maybe 3 or 5 or 6% of their final grade because students are coming with the right answers. There's a lot of tools out there. We brought in other assessment methods into the classroom with more active learning, more design problems that these tools can't necessarily, you need a human to look at and evaluate and come up with an answer, and there can be multiple answers, and another person to look at that and interpret their answers. We've had discussions we have an advisory board in the department. There are about a dozen engineers from industry in the region in the upper Midwest that hire our engineers. So they're from places like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, 3M, John Deere, CNH, Appario, Alteg, Collins Aerospace, in these places. And they've been engineers in industry for 5 years and several decades and everything in between. And we've asked them questions, what are they seeing for their AI tools and what do they expect from our students that are coming out? And the early comments have been, so if it saves us time and it works well, we're going to use it. It's like a calculator, it's kind of that kind of, or software and simulation and modeling tools. But around the code, especially, there still needs to be some interpretation of why do we need the code? What's it doing when we put in our inputs? Are we putting in garbage and getting garbage out? That kind of thing. But there's looks to be some early adoption of these AI-based tools for writing large amounts of code that will save them time and money, which it means people. But there should also be somebody looking at why we need these things. And that's informed us a little bit on how we're starting to inform us on how we're going to teach our early classes, where these tools will come. I don't see us pushing them out of the classroom. It's now, in my mind, how are we going to use them and integrate them We're in the business of engineering education, our department, to enhance the classroom experience. But it is here. They are here. These are here. And now what do we do? Yeah, in a sense. I've heard some equate it to when the calculator hit. When I first started here, I did my undergrad here from 98 to 2002. And one of our early instructors said when he was buying a calculator, he had to decide between a really nice slide rule or one early calculator. And I've heard that some similar discussions are happening here. Is it a tool? Is it something that we're leaning on like a calculator was? Yeah, that's what we're seeing, and changes for objectives that we're doing in the classroom. Yeah. Questions on that? And I'm also open to suggestions. Yes.
Did anyone else have a question? I don't want to, I was going to wait till everyone was finished with Ben. Only thing I did write down one question at the very end, because this is something I was curious. I was going to, if someone's from the math department as well, please weigh in. But Wolfram Alpha is something that's been around for a couple decades at least. How do you deal with that? Because from what I've seen, you can just go basically plug in an equation, say, okay, now give me a proof or derive this. And how have you all dealt with that in the past?
Yeah, that's good. They would have, that's a good question. 15 or 20 years ago, it was, in my mind, what we could see, it was less capable. It's much more capable now, from what we can tell. Some of the problems that in early years when we were doing research and some of the modeling that we were trying to do, we used Wolfram to do some of our analysis, and it worked and didn't work. And there's some numerical approximations taken. And the last 2 semesters, we've worked in that a little bit, and it's gotten a lot better. It's gotten some nicer. It's taken more steps and been more thorough on its algebraic notation, and it'll show the 5 or 6 steps all the way down. That wasn't there, to my knowledge, 15 or 20 years ago. Yeah. And there's some articles I've been reading about ConMigo from Khan Academy and Wolfram having some overlap on working on engineering problems. From what I can tell now, they're separate now, where you can talk to ConMigo about certain topics in engineering. But when you need to look at solving them, you have to jump tools. That might not be the case in the future. Yeah. Based on my experience, but I have a lot to learn. Yeah.
I have a little, so I'm a physics person.
Okay.
Engineering, but close enough. And I think to me, it depends on what the goal of the course is, right? So
yeah,
in some of my upper division courses, I don't really care so much that they show all the steps of an integral, because I know that Mathematica and Wolfram Alpha exist. They can type in integrate, type in the thing, and they'll get the right answer. And in that case, I'm not trying to teach them how to do integrals. I'm trying to teach them how to think about quantum mechanics, how to think about whatever. So in that course, I think of it less of an issue as far as like academic dishonesty goes. But in a course, like it might have a math methods course, we're trying to teach them how to do these types of things. Then I think it's a much more difficult discussion of like, do you have the discussion like, you can't use these, or please don't, or how do we make sure they're not using these kind of things? So I think it depends a lot on what you're trying to teach.
it does. Yeah. And the cheating tends to drop off as you get to the advanced courses, but we are seeing more up there. These tools are pretty remarkable. Yeah. What they can answer. They're not right, and neither am I as an instructor all the time, but yeah. And something I think is a culture that the example of that student putting the laptop in front of you with the Chegg solution, it's a mindset. I think it's out there and it's not being hidden by students in a sense that you think of cheating. It's another tool to get through. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
So Dennis, Dr. Cools, how do you talk to your classes about appropriately using AI with respect to their assignments?
Depending on what class it is, it matters. So calculators, by the way, were feared because they said people wouldn't be able to do math after this. And by the way, they were right. Most people cannot do simple math anymore. So that's what they did, but it's not a big deal. That's big. We're doing amazing things in mathematics that we couldn't do before. It's the thinking in English and in a language that's suffering, because when you do chat GPT, I'm sorry, I'll probably call it TP because I think of toilet paper with this, but because there's a word that I associate with it, but I can't say it in nice company. But anyways, putting together words and thoughts, that's what makes us human. And you've got to be able to communicate in a way that you don't have to go to the computer all the time. Right now, I'm communicating with you. Probably most of you are irritated by my voice and so on, how nasal it is and so on. But you can see what I'm doing in all of this. This is practice. This is not you learn. This is practice. And we should be teaching people how to communicate. Humanities, by the way, that's one of the 4 things that we're supposed to do, communication. If you're allowing these things to write these for you, then what you get is I'm going to say the Norwegian diet. And sorry if you're Norwegian, but it's one of the blandest diets on the face of the earth. When I hear salt and pepper are too spicy, then you know you're in a diet with it's just white or ketchup. Yeah. But what it does is it takes, and this is how I explain it, it takes every piece of information it can find on the internet, enormous amounts of data, and it averages it out. So that's when you're reading it, generally you can see this is the blandest, most innocuous sort of thing. It could be said about anything. And then the other trick I know with this is when students use it, it's amazing that they hit every one of the issues that are important in this particular thing. If this is the way that I do have my students write, I give them a topic they could not have possibly thought about. Your best friend is stealing, is a coworker, you're their boss. What do you do? Sort of thing where they have to come up. And then when I get a whole bunch of data on how many people steal from companies and so on, which is very detailed, after I told them don't use outside sources, I know there's a problem. Oh, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, do not use the checkers. The AI checkers are prohibited by NDSU. Why? Because when you do that, they own whatever you put in, but that's student work. Students own that work. We're not allowed to give that away. Also, it fails a third of the time. More than that. Well, the best thing is a third, it gets it right. It says it's been this AI, but it hasn't been, or it hasn't been and it has, but we're not allowed to use that. So you have to just use your common sense. But anyways, I talked to them about that and I said, look, you do understand that the people who are successful in business and elsewhere are the ones who can think for themselves. The more information you have, the better you are at handling it and maneuvering it and seeing connections. You're going to be the entrepreneurs. You're going to be the successful people. Or you can just be sitting in the basement of maybe your parents' house or in the bottom of the company, eating Cheetos, letting the chat stuff do it for you. By the way, they actually think that's funny. I usually get a laugh off that. Nobody looked, I've actually got one person back there glaring at me. So anyways, but that's what I've got.
Do you put a statement in your syllabus?
Well, that's one of the things I want to work on. I actually rewrote the policy on academic misconduct and it hit a wall because we had some folks come in and they started wordsmithing. My thing was, you're not allowed to use AI unless in the syllabus or your instructor says you're allowed to do it. Other than that, you're not allowed to use it. You can't assume it. And apparently that was not clear enough. So we work at a university. We always make things 10 times harder than they need to be. But if you put it in your syllabus and you say, I consider this to be academic misconduct, it is academic misconduct.
Like, I know you said like we can't use the checkers, but on the blackboard, we have the safe assign. When somebody's up there, so it's,
Yeah.
I'm guessing same as the checkers.
Well, all of the stuff that we use, NDSU use, if you want to use software that touches any of our students' material or somehow is being run through our system, it has to go through ITS because we have to see, does it conform to standards? Does it open us up to cyber attacks? By the way, we get attacked constantly, NDSU do. If it's really slow, that's a cyber attack going on. But so we have to be incredibly careful, first of all, not to put our walls down. But the other thing is safe assign. Well, it used to be good because it would check all of this stuff on the internet, but it would protect the students' material. It did not take this and use it for their database. They were all secured. If you use safe assign now, by the way, it's junk because it only checks against the other students' papers. It no longer goes out and does as much work as it used to do. We had Turnitin, which worked beautifully, but apparently it costs too much. So we no longer have the good one. We have the junky one. You can create your own database, by the way, with safe assign but then you'd have to use the same prompt all the time for writing. Sorry, that was a long-winded one.
No, you're fine.
None of those are actually plagiarism checkers. Those are all similarity checkers.
Similarity, yeah.
If you hear it from Turnitin, it's not a plagiarism. Is it similar?
Similar.
So I'd have students at times whose papers might hit 30%
Yeah.
similar because your citations are all the same as everybody
Yeah,
else.
exactly, yeah.
Actually look
Yeah.
and see, or quotes show up. And so we also want to be careful like how we're.
Right. Well,
Yes, always check. I know, like, I remember I was a student here myself at NDSU and I was submitting assignments, like I remember my professor saying, like, if the plagiarism check is 15% or higher, then pretty much that's plagiarized version of your assignment. So I used to be very scared. It has to be less than 15%. I cannot be similar kind of thing. But now when I look at it as a professor myself, the assignments, like what Dr. Crary just mentioned, is like, some of them are just the references themselves that it is checking against. So obviously it will be a copy because they have to cite the text or citation should be there in the text. So
well, SafeAssign used to go out onto the internet and scraped enormous data for that. And so it would give you, if a student had something in it, it would check against it and it would say 99%. And you would see the original website versus what was in there. And so some of the ones that I failed, you had 100% relation or these words. It's amazing that in this particular area, you've managed to have 100 words exactly the same as this other website that they don't do the website thing so much anymore. It's mostly checking against. And so when I have a large class, the ones who come in first have very low percentages. The ones who are at the end, suddenly they're 10, 15%, maybe 30, because they're coming in last and they're checking against the other papers that are sitting there. So SafeAssign is not a good system anymore.
So along with that, the student actually sees that when they're turning that in and they see that they're similar. And so all that's doing is creating anxiety for students that aren't cheating. If they are seeing that they're similar to their classmates, especially at the end.
You don't turn that feature on. You just keep that feature off and they can't
Oh.
see it.
Oh,
If you want to turn it on to torture them,
right,
you
yeah.
know, we all have academic freedom.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, Dr. Hill, you have different types of assignments and projects. What do you think helps students avoid misusing artificial intelligence or even embracing it based on how have you set up your assignments and projects specific to statistics and math and other content you teach to help them avoid cheating?
Well, I'm really slow typing that into Chat GPT. Give me a second.
Thank you. Well, let me start off by saying, I just want to give you a few assumptions. I was been thinking about this, for the past week or two since Melissa had asked me to do this. And I'll admit that my approach to this, to finding assignments that get around this, I have to admit that a lot of it, of the way we already did our classes, kind of took care of it. Just because for those of you that were here long enough to know Myra Namey and Claudette Peterson, they would call this the signature pedagogy of education. And it's a thing called mastery learning. Nowadays, we call it standards-based grading. But the idea is that they created an environment where the desire to cheat was minimized simply because it was lower stakes. You could basically, each assignment was more of a dialogue with the instructor or with each other. You would be able to correct mistakes. You'd get feedback. It was very, what we'd say, Vygotsky, and there's a lot of what we call scaffolding. There was a lot of developmental feedback, a lot of almost like an apprenticeship in some cases in a lot of our classes. Now, I dove into that without getting to the assumptions. I did want to say that the stuff I'm going to say, it's based on my very limited scope of teaching. Mostly graduate students. I do teach undergraduates in one course and, a smaller part of my teaching load. And then the thing is, everything that I come up with is going to be pretty specialized, which is true for everyone. So everything that I may suggest as an idea for dealing with, discouraging the misuse of AI won't necessarily work for everyone. There's no panacea for this. It's everything is going to be based on the level of the student, grad, undergrad, the content of the course. I mean, an assignment in English is going to be different from assignment in biology and math. And then, of course, I've noticed there seems to be, the thing I seem to take into account a lot is what was their motivation for taking the class in the first place? Is it just a gen ed course? Is it required for their major? If it's a grad student, is it a required core course or is it an elective? And the other things I wanted to add on that is that basically I've come to accept that AI is, well, we've opened Pandora's box. It's not going anywhere. However, if you remember the story that goes with Pandora's box, there was a little bit of hope in the lid. So there is that. And so that's the direction I've taken this. I've just basically embraced AI entirely and said, okay, I've just tried to design my assignments in such a way that if you're going to use it, it's going to be, you can use AI if you want to, but if you wind up doing it that way to get through this, you're going to have to articulate the problem in such a way that you're already going to understand the issue. Now, that doesn't work with every kind of content, of course, but that's sort of my approach. So I guess I can sum it up into saying that there are basically 3 ways you can deal with this. And of course, there may be others that I'm overlooking, but the 3 ways I'm thinking of is, 1, you can basically try to get the student to want to not use AI because, you motivate them to want to learn, make it intrinsic, make it something important to them. Okay. The other way is to make it very difficult or impractical, which, it's not exactly punitive, but it's going the other direction. There is a third option, going absolutely punitive and saying if you use AI, you fail. And at least in my world, that is impractical to the point where I just discounted it entirely. Just because AI checkers, well, as we know, are very inaccurate. And if someone's really determined to use AI, they're going to do it in a way that I'm not going to be able to detect. So for the most part, so basically I integrate it into the assignment. In most cases, I allow them to use AI in a structured way. It's okay. So back to the 2 ideas. I'm sorry, I made notes for myself because I'm one of those people that I'll be on my way home in half an hour or so and be driving, think, crap, I forgot to tell them that important part. And then I'd be looking for your email addresses and it gets really creepy. I'm, stalking your, okay. So the thing that I do, depending on the kind of course, I'm going to kind of break it up into grad student courses, like the methods, the statistics courses that I'll teach for our students. And those kind of things, I will, in many of them, like the survey methodology course, I try to get them to integrate. Whoops.
We're gonna have a follow-up meeting.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, it would have been really good to continue, but probably.
You've got a minute to wrap up. You can wrap up first. Yes. What's lunch? You're between us.
Sorry.
We didn't get to get into some of why we talked a lot about why we can't use the checkers and things. I would have been very interested to hear Dr. Hill's rest. So maybe he could follow up with a creepy email to all of us about that. So I think this conversation is just starting to happen and we need to keep talking about it. If anyone has any last questions about anything related to this topic.
I want to do a plug though, 'cause this is opposite teaching and learning. So for the opposite teaching and learning, if you didn't pick up the professional development schedule for the fall that's sitting in the ballroom, you should. This is a large emphasis is on having these discussions about AI. Nobody has all the answers. Banning it doesn't work. Unlimited usage of it is a little scary, right? We've covered this. So we've got to have these conversations and build this community amongst ourselves of how we might use it in education versus engineering versus criminal justice versus these different areas. And so there are sessions where we can continue the conversation. So I would encourage you to look at those and attend those as you can to keep figuring out how we're going to embrace it and use it, help our students be prepared for the workforce, knowing how to use AI, because the workforce really does expect them to be able to use it more. So that's our goal with our students, right? Most are doing the workforce. So we'll continue those conversations through some of that professional development.
And one last note about the Office of Teaching and Learning, they do have syllabus statements that they have created. So if you do want to look to their office for resources, also the Instructional Design Center, which is formerly the Learning and Applied Innovation Center, they have assessment ideas. So those 2 teams work together a lot to be able to hopefully support you and answer questions you have. If you have questions about academic integrity, the process, how we deal with it at NDSU, I love to talk about it. So anytime you want, we can talk about that or any other issues that you happen to be having. You can find me in the office of the provost and my email address. I want to thank our panel so much for coming, except for Eric, and we will all expect some follow-up from Dr. Hill later. Thank you.